Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. And this week we talked to our friend out on the West Coast in California. Her name is Ashley Elsner. She's the COO of Artery Pay. Hello, Ashley. How are you today?
Jimmy, it's so good to be here again. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. And it's always nice to see your smiling face. And now you've told me you have a reason to be smiling because Artery Pay is coming to California. Congratulations on that. Tell me how that all evolved.
Oh, yay. Yes, so we're actually local to California, but it had taken quite a long time to be able to find appropriate bank backing to actually help us go into the California market because payments is highly dependent on banking. So we have the go ahead to go ahead in California, and we are thrilled because we've already signed a couple of customers and we are getting rolling. And so we're very excited about the opportunity to support the California market.
So Artery Pay, the Venmo of cannabis, is coming to California finally, right?
Finally, it only took 4 years.
Well, we know one thing about the cannabis industry. As fast as it's moved the agenda forward, it's still a struggle. It's sometimes one step forward, two steps back. And I think the perfect example of that is the Safe Banking Act, which has now been passed not once, not twice, not three times, but four times by the U.S. House of Representatives, only to be stalled in the U.S. Senate. And that's exactly where we are now. Do you think that this bill in its current form will ever see the light of day in the U.S. Senate?
So, having read through the most recent form, I didn't see anything in particular that should cause it to stall in the Senate. But the problem in the Senate these days is that really there is a specific agenda that Biden is trying to get passed through the Senate and through Congress in the next 2 years before the midterm, where there's a chance that control over one or both of the houses will go back in the other direction. So while one party is controlling Congress as well as the presidency, there's a lot that you can get done from a legislative perspective. It just depends on what the priorities are. And having looked at Biden's particular agenda, it doesn't appear that safe banking is on it. So that does not mean that it will not get passed in the next 2 years, but once that midterm comes back, if one of the houses, one or both of the houses reverts back to Republican control, you can kind of expect that it will be a while before we can get any passage for or movement on safe banking or any other marijuana related legislation. Even though, as something that is truly genuinely bipartisan, I believe that cannabis actually is. It is a genuinely bipartisan initiative that, frankly, everybody really agrees with, but nobody is going to put their political capital towards getting it passed right now. So that's what I've seen.
And I think that what's happening now is anything that the Democrats put out there, the Republicans are just going to say no to.
Yes.
And then negotiations begin. How important, as an attorney, Ashley?
That's true. These Republicans are difficult to predict.
They are, and they have their own problems inside their own party right now too. That being said, it's interesting that cannabis has become an issue between not just Democrats and Republicans, but inside that Republican Party as well. I think it was something like 37% Republicans say no, which means that you've got a whole bunch more saying we're willing to listen to that. And 69% of Americans now are saying this plant should be legalized for a number of reasons. And safe banking seems to be the simplest way to get it done. But nothing is simple in Washington, D.C. It's got to be so frustrating, don't you think?
It is frustrating, but let me clarify one thing. Safe banking does not legalize cannabis.
Correct.
What safe banking does is it states very clearly to financial regulators that if the reason that they are assessing penalties or discouraging financial institutions for working with cannabis is just for cannabis sake and doesn't actually have to do with any legitimate rules violations, then they're directing the regulators not to do so. The other thing that it does is it prevents certain aspects of criminal prosecution, again, for circumstances of providing services to the cannabis space, but it does not mean that you have any change to the way that you are supposed to be providing those services. There is a legal way to do so, and there are lots and lots of illegal ways to do so. And if you find yourself doing things that violate the policies and procedures that you're supposed to have in place as a financial institution, if you are in fact violating regulation, they can still actually penalize you or force you to exit from it if you don't have appropriate processes and procedures and controls in place. Another thing that safe banking doesn't do is it doesn't mean that financial institutions are suddenly able to throw down the barriers at the state level and allow cross-border transactions within the states. So basically anything where you're crossing a state boundary within the United States implicates the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution and therefore federal law. So the requirements to not allow work within the financial space to cross state lines is still there, and that control is still a very expensive control. Additionally, the compliance reporting requirements are not required to change. There is a clause in safe banking that actually directs FinCEN to update its guidance from 2014. But frankly, an updating to the guidance could just be to, instead of referencing the Cole memo priorities, to actually put them in there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have decreases in the reporting, even though I believe that's what Congress is intending, but they don't state it outright. There's no direction there. And frankly, if we're being really honest, the regulators are in a better position to understand how the financial services space should be regulated for this. And Congress really isn't in that great of a position to make those decisions. So that's why Congress delegates to regulators to actually come up with the real regulations that guide and determine the operation procedures for financial institutions. So I think that's an important thing to recognize. But it is definitely a step forward, but it's a baby step.
Right. No, we know it's a baby step, and they can't even get to the starting line, which is really frustrating, I know, for all the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. and those that are, pro-cannabis and looking to do cannabis reform. The other side of that reform strategy has to do with social injustice. And
Yes.
we know that Senator Booker is very much involved with Chuck Schumer on actually crafting cannabis reform legislation to bring to the Senate for. What I'm hearing from you is maybe cannabis reform has a better chance hitching its wagon to injustices that we all recognize. It's been racially profiling it for years. I just wonder if that means that, excuse me, that they'll have a better chance for the social injustices that are out there rather than the economics and the safe banking to get it forward.
Well, people don't understand the importance and the problems of financial access. I mean, it's something that gets talked about a lot, but frankly, when you start saying that you're just going to be able to change financial access by providing an on-ramp, that doesn't do the job. The infrastructure of our financial systems are actually not great with respect to being able to provide really legitimate financial access across places and peoples that have generally not been able to access financial services. So when you get into that, that's a different question. And frankly, is something that needs to be fixed on the infrastructure side first. And that's actually how we approached it from Artery Pay. If we are able to update financial infrastructure in the United States in a way that allows for a change to some of the models that have been really quite they unfortunately have had bias within the models of providing financial access. And it's true they're all financially based, but unfortunately, they have also had an impact, a disproportionate impact on certain groups within our society, and we know and understand that. But that in terms of trying to address those things, it's very, very hard to address them from a legislative perspective when it comes to the financial space because it's regulated, but the government cannot tell financial institutions what to do. They can tell them how to do it, but they can't tell them who they provide access to or not, so long as it's not doesn't implicate specific constitutionally protected classes, which would be at this time. This hasn't been expanded yet. I expect it to be, but gender, race, religious preferences, and
Sexual orientation. I'm going to go out there and
actually that one's not in there yet. That's
interesting.
It's not in there yet. Age, though, age discrimination is. Now, I believe that sexual orientation eventually will become part of that as well. But that's something that would have to come down from the Supreme Court because it's not specifically listed in the constitutional amendments. And I believe those other classes of persons that ended up in there may have also come through Supreme Court law versus amendments to the Constitution, which would be that would be the only way that you can make sure that neither Congress nor the Supreme Court are able to impact those rights in the future for those persons. So,
well, I'll tell you, you've certainly thrown a lot of water on our optimism about cannabis reform, but it's the reality.
I'm talking about financial reform. I'm talking about financial reform. Cannabis can be addressed at multiple levels. Cannabis for injustices that can be addressed at the state level. Massachusetts has done some work with respect to trying to help with social equity and economic empowerment. I think those are great programs. In California, they haven't done so at the state level. However, at the city level, they do have social equity programs as well. And a lot of them actually target formerly incarcerated for drug charge people. I believe most of those have been expunged now, though. So they're not ex-cons anymore, which is awesome. In terms of federal drug reform, that is hard. That's going to be very hard to get through, even when everybody agrees that it needs to happen. And again, it's partly because the specific group of Republicans that are in Congress right now are just very, very opposed to anything that gets put forward by one who's not one of their own.
That's a great way to put it. There is a stone wall between these.
Partisan here. I'm trying not to be. I honestly think that both parties kind of stink. But you can quote me on that.
That's a good one, and yet it's still the only system we have right now.
Yes,
we can't cure all the ills in our government and how it works right now, but it is a system that we all are supposed to embrace and have to deal with one way or another.
However, I think that you're right, though. Social injustice actually is one of the things that's very much on the Biden agenda for the next couple of years. So they are trying to push those things through. So that kind of reform and legislation might pass, depending on how coupled it is with either descheduling or other versions of legalization that could come through Congress.
Right. And, again, look, the Democrats got in saying they were going to decriminalize. They said that. Now, it won't be the first time that a politician actually said something to get in office and then change their mind once they get there. Unfortunately, that's happened way too often in our political system, right?
And decriminalization also is not the same thing as legalization or descheduling. It's not. All that does is mean that in terms of drug charges for sales, that could still happen. But in terms of drug charges on a personal consumption level, that's what would go away. That's really what they mean when they say decriminalizing.
Right. In other words, well, think about how many people are still in jail for possession of cannabis, and I'm talking about small amounts of cannabis, they are in jail paying their price for that. And now that product in the state, perhaps where they even got arrested, it's a legal entity now, a legal plant. And boy, you talk about injustice. That really gets my blood boiling a little bit, because that needs to change as soon as possible. And I really do think that Senator Schumer and Senator Booker are trying to do that. But I got to tell you, I am not very confident in the whole environment that exists in Washington, D.C. right now, because there is such, if you say yes, I'm going to say no. If you say no, I'm going to say yes. White, black, black, white. I mean, it's really
This is not policy.
opposites are not attracting.
Well, I mean, it's more than that. This is not about, they're not doing what's right for citizens right now by
Right.
They're not policy making, they're preventing policy making. They're preventing and they are preventing things that the data supports. And even people on the conservative spectrum on that are Republicans, but not these kinds of Republicans.
I get
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you get your far right, and then you have your moderates, and obviously trying to convince a moderate Republican, you think you have a better shot at that, but they don't want to upset their own party, right? I mean, look.
Oh, that's the thing. There's a lot at stake for them. Frankly, your options in politics right now, and this is a problem with the two-party system. Your options in politics right now are either you suck up to one party or you suck up to the other, and the people who are in control of the Republican Party right now are, well, I mean, they are very, very hard to
convince, change.
Very hard to align yourself with them if you are an actual policymaker, because what they're doing is so I mean, they're still very belligerent right now, and they're going to be belligerent at least for the next couple of years until the midterm. And until they get voted out, they may still be belligerent. I mean, these are people who are quite dogmatic, and frankly, trying to do things that are the right thing for the community is not really part of their strength.
No, it's a shame, but it is our country, and we have to love it because it's the one we're in right now. And
I love
as always, I enjoy talking with you, Ashley, about not just politics but finances as well. And I want to thank you for your support of Pro Cannabis Media as well. So, for Ashley Elsner from Artery Pay, and by the way, if people want to find out about how they can get Artery Pay, how do they do that?
Well, you can go to our website, www.arterypay.com, and reach out to us, or you can reach out to me directly. My email is Ashley, ASHLEY, @arterypay.com. Not too complicated, and I will be happy to connect you with our sales team. So we are very excited to be in California. Our project in Nevada is probably going to be picking up soon. Montana is also on our list for the next couple of months. So that should be coming shortly as well. And thank you so much for having me today, Jimmy.
As always, you are welcome. So for Ashley Elsner from Artery Pay, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Thanks for watching and listening to another edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Hi, Jimmy Young here, and I have to ask you, are you secure? If you're in the cannabis industry, you have to have security for your grow facility or dispensary. And we are so happy to welcome Salient Systems to our group of supporters. You get to call their rep. His name is Ben Shower at Salient Sys cannabismedia.com. So don't even wait an hour. Call Ben Shower at 413-333-7974.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.